They told you kings were chosen by God. But what if I told you the crown was never a gift from heaven, but a pact sealed in blood, shadow, and whispers? Tonight, we peel back the gilded veil of history and step into the abyss where monarchs, emperors, and dynasties were not merely born into privilege, but bound by something darker, a demonic bloodline that secretly rules humanity. You see, the idea that rulers are anointed, holy, divinely chosen, it has always been a story told to the masses. But behind palace walls, behind the golden thrones and jeweled crowns, there's another story. A story whispered in forbidden manuscripts, etched into forgotten seals, and hidden in the rituals no historian dares to record. The story of the Blood Pact. Legends across cultures, Babylonian, Egyptian, Hebrew, even medieval European, speak of rulers who gained power not by right, but by sacrifice. In the East, they called them the Serpent Kings, claiming descent from Naga spirits. In Mesopotamia, the rulers said they were offspring of gods who walked with demons. In Europe, whispers of royal families traced their roots back not to noble heroes, but to beings that crawled out of the abyss. And in all these myths, one pattern emerges: the serpent, the shadow, the blood, the bloodline. It begins not in castles or cathedrals, but in the primal dark, in the covenant. Ancient texts, rarely read aloud, tell us of a covenant made between mankind and those who dwell beyond. A covenant of blood. Kings would rule, yes, but in exchange, they would bear a lineage tainted by infernal seed. Think of it. Generation after generation, a child born into luxury, into destiny, not realizing that within their veins flowed something unholy. You thought monarchy was about politics? No. It was about breeding. It was about blood. Pure, cursed blood. Let us wander back, far before the Middle Ages, before Rome, before Egypt's pyramids, to Sumer, the cradle of civilization, where the kings listed in cuneiform tablets claimed descent from gods who ruled before the flood. The Sumerian king list is not just a record, it is a declaration. Our kingship descended from heaven. Or did it descend from something far lower? What if heaven was a polite word, a mask for something else? Something with horns, perhaps. The story grows darker in the Hebrew scriptures, where whispers of Nephilim, the offspring of divine beings and mortal women, hint at an intermingling of bloodlines. Giants, warriors, men of renown, or cursed progeny marked forever by their unholy sires. Some scholars, the fringe and the forbidden, dare to say that royal lines across history were careful to keep this blood intact, weaving marriages not for love, not for politics, but for ritual, to keep the blood burning, to keep the pact alive. And if that's true, then every king's crown was nothing but a collar forged in the fires of the abyss. Let me ask you something. Why do you think monarchs obsessed over purity of blood? You were taught it was about noble houses and political alliances. But what if it was about something far more sinister? What if it was about guarding the demonic spark hidden in their veins? A spark that could die if mixed too freely with the common. That is why incest ran rampant in dynasties. That is why purity was enforced with brutality. Because this wasn't about genealogy. It was about breeding. It was about blood. Pure, cursed blood. Let us wander back, far before the Middle Ages, before Rome, before Egypt's pyramids, to Sumer, the cradle of civilization where the kings listed in cuneiform tablets claimed descent from gods who ruled before the flood. The Sumerian king list is not just a record, it is a declaration. Our kingship descended from heaven. Or did it ascend from something far lower? What if heaven was a polite word, a mask for something else? Something with horns, perhaps. The story grows darker in the Hebrew scriptures, where whispers of Nephilim, the offspring of divine beings and mortal women, hint at an intermingling of bloodlines. Giants, warriors, men of renown, or cursed progeny marked forever by their unholy sires. Some scholars, the fringe and the forbidden, dare to say that royal lines across history were careful to keep this blood intact, weaving marriages not for love, not for politics, but for ritual, to keep the blood burning, to keep the pact alive. And if that's true, then every king's crown was nothing but a collar forged in the fires of the abyss. Let me ask you something. Why do you think monarchs obsessed over purity of blood? You were taught it was about noble houses and political alliances. But what if it was about something far more sinister? What if it was about guarding the demonic spark hidden in their veins? A spark that could die if mixed too freely with the common. That is why incest ran rampant in dynasties. That is why purity was enforced with brutality. Because this wasn't about genealogy. It was about breeding. It was about blood. Pure, cursed blood. In Egypt, pharaohs called themselves sons of Ra, but beneath the golden sun masks, rituals were carried out in shadow. Animal sacrifices, blood offerings, sacred unions between siblings, all done not for God, but for something hungry in the dark. A presence that demanded continuity. A bloodline that must not break. The serpent slithered quietly into Europe. Medieval kings, beneath their Christian crowns, carried secret sigils, practiced rites in candlelit catacombs, and whispered invocations no historian dares to record. They said it was for protection, but who were they really protecting? Themselves, or the demon that owned them? This is why every empire falls the same way. Rome, Babylon, even dynasties in Asia, they rise with unnatural brilliance, with divine favor. And then they rot from within, because the blood demands too much, because the pact eats them alive. And yet, the blood never dies. Even when thrones crumble, the bloodline slithers onward, hidden, preserved, waiting. They say in Europe today, many royal families still share an unbroken ancestry, all tracing back to a handful of shadowed figures. Coincidence? Or continuity of the pact? Perhaps that's why every king knew the truth. They knew their throne was not inherited, it was leased. And the landlord was no god. Part one of this tale is only the surface. We have yet to descend into the rituals themselves, into the whispered connections between dragons, demons, and dynasties, and into the real reason the crown gleams even in the darkest abyss. But for now, remember this. Kings ruled you, not because of God's blessing, but because of the demon's blood in their veins. And that blood still flows today. And if that blood still flows today, then we must ask the question no historian, no priest, no scholar dares to ask. Who truly rules us? Is it the governments we vote for, the parliaments and presidents we see on our screens? Or are they nothing more than actors on a stage, while behind them the bloodline moves silently, endlessly, like a serpent coiled beneath the floorboards of history? To understand the full weight of this inheritance, we must step into the rituals themselves, the ceremonies never written in official records, the rites whispered in catacombs and candlelit chambers beneath palaces. These were not coronations, they were conjurations. For every crown placed on a monarch's head, there was blood spilled, whether the people saw it or not. Some rituals demanded animal sacrifice, some demanded human. And though history books tell us that kings ruled with divine favor, the truth is far more chilling. They fed that favor with offerings, with blood poured like wine into the abyss. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs conducted midnight rites to honor serpent deities said to guard the underworld. These rites were hidden, never meant for the eyes of commoners. They believed the serpent carried the bloodline itself, that without honoring it, their reign would collapse. And collapse it always did, but only after centuries of feeding the pact. In Babylon, records speak of Marduk, but beneath the praise lies an older, darker cult, the worship of Tiamat, the dragon of chaos. Those who dared whisper the truth said the rulers were not simply blessed by gods, but tied to her womb, her blood, her chaos. In Europe, medieval coronations carried veiled symbols, dragon banners, serpent carvings, crowns shaped like coils. They told the people it was heraldry, decoration, pretty symbols for pretty kings. But those sigils were seals, marks of allegiance, reminders of the covenant. And the rituals did not die. They evolved, they adapted, they slipped under the skin of Christianity, cloaked themselves in hymns and cathedrals, but beneath the cross, the serpent still waited, always waiting. Why do you think royal families guarded their genealogies so obsessively? Why were archives of ancestry guarded like treasure? Because it was treasure. The blood itself was the currency. If the line broke, the pact broke, and that could never be allowed. And so the marriages continued, cousins to cousins, siblings to siblings, alliances that looked political but were in truth occult breeding programs, to keep the demon spark alive, to keep the serpent's coil unbroken. And today the lineage still holds. Every monarch you've seen photographed, every royal you've watched smile on television, every wedding that captured the eyes of millions, they are not fairy tales, they are rituals, they are continuity, they are proof that the pact endures. Think of the obsession with dragons in heraldry. Why did European royals wrap themselves in dragon crests, dragon thrones, dragon myths? Why were crowns forged with scales and claws carved into them? Because the dragon is the blood. The dragon is the pact. The dragon is the demon. They knew it, even when they denied it. And when you see their ceremonies, their parades, their blessings by bishops and popes, understand this. What you are really seeing is theater, a performance to distract you, while behind the curtain the old rites are whispered still. You think blood sacrifices are gone. Do you think modern kings no longer need offerings? The bloodline still demands. Wars are waged not always for politics, not always for resources, but for blood, for offerings to feed the pact. Millions die, and the throne stands steady. That is no coincidence. You see, the demon bloodline does not only rule, it consumes. And it has consumed for thousands of years.
There are researchers who whisper about 13 bloodlines, the hidden dynasties that never broke, never died, moving silently beneath empires. The Rothschilds, the Windsors, the old Merovingian line, whispers of continuity that stretch like shadows through the centuries. You laugh, call it conspiracy. But even conspiracy hides a kernel of truth, and the truth is that royalty never dies. It transforms. It survives. Because it is not entirely human. The serpent moves differently now, not always on thrones, not always in crowns, but in boardrooms, in banks, in quiet handshakes behind closed doors. The pact no longer needs castles, it needs control. And it has it. Every king knew the truth. Every ruler felt the weight of the leash around their blood. They smiled for their people, but in their chambers they whispered the names not of God, but of the demon who owned them. And those whispers never stopped. And so we arrive here, in our world, where kings and queens still smile for cameras, still wave from gilded carriages, still baptize their children with holy water. Holy water. But beneath it all, they guard the blood. They guard the pact. They guard the curse. And the curse guards them. Always. Do you feel it now, the truth sinking in? That kings were never divine, that their crowns were chains, that their blood was never pure but poisoned? That you were never ruled by men, but by the demon inside them? And that is why the serpent still smiles. Because its blood still flows, even now. Even now.